Everything that they do allowed or not allowed and that kind of thing. I wouldn't need the microphone. In this then? Okay. Just talk quietly. So it's the ethical dimension of what we can do, you know. So you can't just do studies on people. You have to get permission. So even our government recognizes that things can be unethical in what you do. Okay, so oh, we got on the slide. Good. All right, so the slides are up there. You can see. So our world is a very, very quickly changing place, right? It's changing rapidly, in ways that it never has changed this rapidly in history. Never before have human changed this quickly, and scientific advancement changed this quickly, right? So we as a church, as a people, as humans, not just the church, human beings have to think about these changes that are happening so quickly and how we're going to handle these changes. Recently I was listening to something in medicine, and they were saying that even guidelines for treatment of things like diabetes and airways disease and things like that, they can't keep up with the changes, right? They just can't keep up. There's too many changes, so guidelines can't catch up. And it's never happened before, because normally guidelines will change every 5 or 10 years with some new medicine that comes out that's been studied and whatever. But things are moving very, very rapidly. And not only is science moving rapidly, but humans are changing rapidly. Like, it used to be that the change in mindset would happen in generations, right? So you'd have 100 years before people start thinking a little bit differently. Now you have 2 siblings thinking very differently from one another. It's let alone like me to my kids, and my dad to me, and him to his dad, right? The change of mentality is happening very, very quickly. And a huge part of that is obviously to do with technological advancement, the fact that the world is a very small place, right? So now if you open a business, right, an online business, literally the whole world can be your customer. So someone like Bezos, you know, the guy who owns Amazon, right? He became the richest guy in the world because the whole world was his customer. The whole billions of people in the world suddenly buying from this one company. That could never happen historically. It just could not be that way, right? So the world is very small. And so because the world is very small, the world changes rapidly. We're aware of changes that are happening in other parts of the world very, very quickly. So again, for example, you think about Egypt. If any of you have been to Egypt recently, anyone been to Egypt recently here? No one? Anyone heard about what's happening in Egypt recently? The main thing you hear is that, oh, it's changed so much, right? So there's some areas that are ultra modern, way nicer than anything you find in the Western world. The mentality of people, very westernized. They're becoming very secular. That's the feedback you get. Not all of Egypt, obviously. There's parts of Egypt that are not like that, and there's parts but the reason why parts of the Eastern world are changing in that way and becoming very secular, which they never had historically, because the world is a small place. They're exposed through social media and television and things like that to the Western culture and mindset, and etc., etc. So things changing rapidly. The whole point of that introduction is to understand that humans are changing, science is changing, okay? The way we think, the way we behave, what we're able to do is changing, and it's changing very, very quickly. So yeah, there's some stuff there about enlightenment and post-truth era, but we can talk about that as we go if you want. Okay, and as I said, science is changing to an extent where guidelines can't keep up, and as a church, we also have to kind of keep up. So these, when something new comes along, the church kind of has to have a stance. Like, for example, when COVID came and swept through the world, a lot of people look to the church. Should we be vaccinated or not? Are we allowed to be vaccinated? What does the church say about vaccines, right? And so suddenly the church has to kind of think to itself, ethically, what does the church do in that setting? Do they tell people to have the vaccine? Do they tell people not to have the vaccine? Should they shut their mouths and stay out of it? What should they do? That's the ethical question that the church has to answer. And so we're in a very, very rapidly changing environment. Okay, and the church has to try and think about what to do about ethics. Okay, ethics in general. It's not just bioethics, but all ethics, but particularly when it comes to biology. And you have to then think about then what is right and what is wrong. Okay, you have to decide what is right and what is wrong, and what is allowed and what is not allowed. Okay. In general terms, you know, are we allowed to use medicine, for example, at all? And then if we are allowed to use medicine, which medicines are reasonable and which medicines are not reasonable. Okay, so that's the question we're going to think about. Does anyone have any questions or ideas about that so far? Okay, we'll talk about that instead. About God. You mean for Christians, or so the concept of God? So I'm not sure I understand your question completely, but are you saying you will come to the point where science disproves God? No. Oh, okay. So yeah. So the question is, are we? Is that like the cop out answer? Yeah, the cop out. Don't understand? You have to have faith. Is that what it is? All right. No, the answer is no. Science and science is never going to prove God, nor disprove God. Okay, it's not. It's impossible. That's not what faith is. The concept of faith has always been something that is in the heart of a person, and it's bound to the relationship with God. It's got nothing to do with science. Can never prove God, and if it could, then it wouldn't be faith. You know, it wouldn't be faith at all. It would just be simple fact. So no, they're two separate questions, and will never be that. There will always be this tug of war between reason and faith, even though there shouldn't be. There shouldn't be. So what will happen is at some point, science will get to the point where they'll say, well, God surely can't exist, and we know too much about the universe for God to exist and all these things. But it will never be. And science has already kind of got to that point, but they will never disprove a relationship between a person and God. It's impossible. Nor will the church disprove science, because that's not the role of the church. The church is not to disprove science. It's simply to believe that God is the author of science. That's the idea. All right, so then the next question I have for you is, how do we decide what is right and wrong in general? What sort of criteria do you have in your own mind, or does the church use, or does society use to decide right from wrong? Abuna, let's share. Abuna will share, because we're just discussing. We're just talking. So what do we do? How do we decide what's right and wrong? The Bible, good Sunday school answer. Because all right, everything. All right, I'll give the counter argument. The Bible. Okay, what does the Bible say about abortion? What does the Bible say about euthanasia? What does the Bible say about the oral contraceptive pill? All right, so the Bible doesn't talk about everything. So that's my point there. That the Bible doesn't necessarily mention everything. So that answer doesn't always complete the discussion. What else? What criteria do we have? What if you had to decide what was right or wrong? What would you think about? A natural law, very good. Hello, Bobby. How are you? Thanks for coming.
Say Jesus.
You want to say Jesus?
I'll do the Jesus.
Good girl, Baba. Okay, very good. All right, so Maria said, okay, now come sit. Now, okay, good girl, come. Shh. Good girl. Now sit quietly, okay? Good girl. So there's a natural law, okay, and so there is a lot of kind of philosophers or people that think about So people will think that there's a natural law, okay, that basically whatever is inbuilt into nature is kind of the correct way of doing things. For example, survival of the fittest, right? Survival of the fittest says that if you're stronger, bigger, smarter, whatever, then you win, and you always win. And if I act on that, then that's okay. So I'm bigger and stronger than Kiro. I want that chair. What do? I yank Kiro, chuck him off the chair. I sit down. He gets upset. That's not fair. I say, what? Fair, not fair. It's irrelevant. Not right and wrong dictates that I sit on this chair. Is that how we decide what is right and wrong? And is it reasonable? Yeah.
I was raised up in Christian values, everything, and knowing that from right or wrong. But it might be different to someone that's living in LA that has no church around them, although they're aware, they might say they're Christian, but their values are, and their right and wrong is influenced by social media, their favorite influences, and so forth. So I think environment definitely has a big influence on it.
So what you're suggesting is that there is no objective right or wrong. It's simply based on what I feel or what I've been taught or what around me in my circumstances, right or wrong.
I think today's generation, the younger generation, it is getting stronger and stronger to that point of view, because although their parents can, or obviously their elders that might have a bit more wisdom and so forth, that might influence them a lot better. The more popular, quote unquote popular, being on social media and those influencers, they might go and follow their beliefs and their right or wrongs because all their friends are doing the same thing.
Yep. So that's something that again comes out of the last couple of centuries, the thinking that that my reason can dictate what is right or wrong. My reason, I can think through everything. That's what the Enlightenment says. And what's that then led to is that there's no objective truth, right? So that's why we call ourselves now, we live in the post-truth era, because there is no objective truth, There is my truth and there's your truth. In LA, there you have a truth. In Sydney, I have a truth. Next door, he has a truth, etc. There's no objective truth. And yeah, a lot of people ascribe to that way of thinking, that there is no objective truth. I'll jump the gun a little bit and I'll say that's not the Christian way of thinking. But yes, people do say that, and therefore right and wrong is based on what I consider to be right or wrong. But even those individuals have a certain criteria. And so that's why I'm trying to grab the criteria out of you guys. What other things would make that person in LA or that person in Sydney decide what is right and wrong? How would, when you're thinking through, what other things would you think about? Yeah, good. We did that one already. So I said, what does the Bible say about the oral contraceptive pill? Louis couldn't answer me because he couldn't find the oral contraceptive pill in the Bible. The priests? But what if I disagree with the Bunapola? Or Bunapola disagrees with the Bunamina? No set rule, okay. Yeah, go. I think the church in general has a general stance on a few things. Yeah, well, yes, the church does, and I'm going to get into that. But my question is, what's it based on? What's it based on? Good. Yeah. So that we're getting there. We're getting to the church's view that it's based on certain principles which we do extract from the Bible, but not only the Bible. But so we'll get there. But what other ways do people think? So the victimless crime, yeah. the victimless crime. It's not wrong as long as I kind of do my own thing. Yeah. Yeah. So my own autonomy. Yeah. So what you guys are saying there is it's like value rating which kind of virtues or values or morals are higher than another. For example, autonomy, I can decide what I do with my body as long as it doesn't hurt anyone, is more valuable or is a higher thing than, for example, purity, right? So as long as I'm not harming anyone, my purity is not that relevant, right? Whereas historically, or you go think about Iran, you know, they're doing riots in Iran at the moment. Why are they having riots in Iran? Does anyone read the news? No, that's not it. Yeah, what happened? That's right. So what happened? A lady, she got arrested because she wasn't wearing the hijab. And who arrested her? Who? The police? Which type of police? The moral police. They have something called the moral police. The moral police arrested her and she died in custody. And so everyone is up in arms about it. Because, well, obviously not all society is agreeing on that, but the principle is that purity is higher than autonomy. She doesn't have the right to not wear that. She has to wear that because purity comes higher. That, do you see that way of, so in one society, yeah, it's autonomy, and another side it's human rights, another society it's whatever it is. So there's different things that, and so they rate morals and they kind of put them in order. Anything else? So yeah, so we're getting closer and closer to the Christian view now. So the presence of God, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Without going any further, you know, trying to extract more information out of you guys. Basically, as I said, so sometimes you order values, okay, as we said, so equality versus freedom, which one is higher? You know, autonomy versus purity, There's so you try and explain away morality. So you try and think about it. Okay, so right and wrong is judged on its goals, right? So it's right if it's leading to a greater good, you know. But if it's not leading to a greater good, then no, it would be wrong. So that's another way of thinking. And I've got some examples of where that would get you into trouble. You might think about right and wrong is that something is right no matter what the consequences are, okay? So lying is always wrong. Even if I have, for example, I live in Nazi Germany and I have a Jewish person hiding underneath my bed and the police come knocking on my door, well, lying is always wrong. So I have to tell them that that guy is under there to get him killed. Does that make sense? So that's another way of thinking, that there is this strict rigidity, right and wrong, and always apply the right under all circumstances. There's some people, as Maria pointed out, that there's a deep foundational element to right and wrong. So for example, what justifies right and wrong is natural law, for example. It's based on the reality of nature. And then there's a social dimension, which I think that's pointed out kind of about the fact that, and this is what's happening in Iran at the moment, by the way, is the social dimension that actually the community decides what is right and wrong, and you are bound by the community. And so the community, which is this kind of living, moving organism, decides in time what is right and wrong. Of course, there's lots of circumstances where community can be wrong. Okay, so they're just the different ways of thinking. Okay, so then now we've thought of different ways of thinking. We've touched on some of the Christian ways. What is the Christian way? What is the deep justification? What is the reasoning, the rationale, the content of morality, the social framework that leads to morality for a Christian? There is an answer. We've almost got it. No, the answer is not the Bible. The Bible feeds into it, of course, but yeah. But what's the thing that brings it all together? Close. We're getting there. Yeah, no. It's and Mark was the one who came closest earlier, unwittingly. So one of the Orthodox kind of moral thinkers, this guy called Professor Tristram Engelhardt Jr., he says, so he's talking about letting us think about what is right and wrong, okay, us concluding this society versus this society, this person versus that person, basing it on all these other frameworks and things, and upbringing and LA versus Sydney and whatever. What that leads to, he says, this kind of way of explaining ethics reached its height during the Enlightenment, that reason would be able to unite Europe in a common moral understanding, actually produced as many secular accounts of justice, fairness, equality, rights, and the good life as the Reformation had produced of the scriptures and the nature of religious faith. So is that clear what he's saying there? Or not clear? Clear as mud, huh? Is that clear what he's saying there? He's saying letting us decide what is right and wrong based on my reasoning leads to too many different opinions about what justice is, what fairness is, what equality is. And so you end up with this idea of what, and you can see it in society now, equality and fairness and things like that is one thing, but then if you think differently, well, no, there's no equality for you, So letting reason dictate what is right and wrong, he says, leads to what the Reformation did to Christianity. Led to thousands of denominations of which one has the right God, That's the same problem. So again, how do we think about it? He continues and says, only in a relationship through worship to the linchpin of reality, that is God, can fragmental moral practices be made whole. Okay, I'll read that again. I want someone to tell me what that sentence means. Only in a relationship through worship to the linchpin of reality, that is God, can fragmental moral practices be made whole. What does that mean? Someone's got to tell me. I'm not going to move on. Very good. Why? Close, but yeah. So how does he put it? What's the critical? The linchpin of reality is the essence of reality. God is the natural law. God is the content of morality. He is the linchpin of reality. That's what he's saying there. So all these other ways of thinking are trying to get to think about God. And so the only way you can really think about God and always know what is right and wrong is how? What does he say? In a relationship through worship. In a relationship through worship. So what he's saying is that the only way you can always know what is right and wrong under all circumstances is by having a relationship through worship to the essence of reality. To the essence of what is real, that is God, will always guide you in that. And so then, and that is of course the claim of the church, by the way. Why the church claims moral authority. The church has moral authority. Why? Because the church should and does have a relationship through worship to God. That's what the church is. If the church loses that, if the church does not know who God is, does not have a relationship to God, the church will lose its capacity to decide what is right and wrong completely. And that goes for us as Christians. As Christians, often where our authority has come from in history, in society, has been by having the moral voice, right? You have the moral voice, the priests and the monks and the bishops. the second that they lost that relationship to God, they started to chase money or whatever in the process, which happened unfortunately in some eras of history. They lost their moral voice because no one could then believe in what they're saying is right or wrong, in exactly the way that Jesus himself rebukes the Pharisees. When they lost that relationship of worship to God, then they had no moral voice. And so God says, Jesus says to them, all right, listen to what they say, but don't do what they do. They're hypocrites. They've lost that connection to what is real. And so Jesus kind of redefined it and brought people into a new relationship with God, back into that linchpin of reality. Does that kind of make sense? Even this philosopher I have at the bottom there, Immanuel Kant, he says that you can never, and he didn't believe in God, but he says you can't live the highest moral life unless you live as though God exists. So for him, all right, God doesn't exist, but you really can't be that moral unless you live as though God exists, as though there's an external benchmark. It is not based on my reason versus your reason versus your reason versus your reason. It doesn't work like that. There is an external reality to all of us, and that external reality decides what is right and wrong by his very nature, because he is what is reality. There is no reality outside of him. So sometimes when we think about things as real, and we say this is right and wrong, but we're thinking outside of God. We're thinking outside reality. It's just a figment of my imagination. It's sometimes a collective figment of our imagination. Humans just kind of decide, well, this is better, this is worse. And then after 50 years, we decide, oh, that was not right what we did. And they'll apologize for it, you know? So there is a linchpin of reality. Does anyone have any questions about that before we move on? Does that make sense? Good. Linchpin is like the thing that holds it down. You know, I actually don't know the definition of linchpin, but what I imagine is, you see the shade sails? Yeah, outside, there's shade sails. They attach to the post through a pin. So the thing that's holding everything, like the center of. Yeah. What? Say that again? Okay. So the thing that's vital to, the center. So the way that we would explain it as a church, it's not based on individual interpretation. It's based on then once you're basing your morality on God, okay, it's still not up to the individuals within the church to decide that I've got a relationship to God and therefore I say what's right. Okay, that's wrong because it's still based on my reasoning. So that's why we have the church and the Bible, so tradition and scripture, to decide what is wrong. And the way that's the next thing we're going to talk about is how then does the church decide what is right and wrong based on that. Okay? And so the next thing we're going to think about is, as we said at the start, unfortunately the Bible would be great if the Bible talked about everything, systematized everything. Said that, all right, we got the morning after pill, we got the oral contraceptive pill, we got the IVF, we got other types of assisted fertilization, we got surrogacy, bang, 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 lists it, right, wrong, right, wrong, right, wrong. Easy. We wouldn't have to have this discussion. It's all dictated to us. But unfortunately, the Bible does not. Why? What? Say. Developing. Yeah, it's developing. That's right. To be a scientific book. You know, so the Bible is not a scientific book, and so it's not in the Bible these things that are changing, right? So what the church then does, through a consciousness of community that are attached to God, through the Bible and the principles in the Bible, it creates a series of what Andrew called precepts or principles to work within, okay? And it puts a series of boundaries. It says this is what we work within. And those boundaries are based on God. So some of those boundaries, and this probably isn't all of the boundaries, but these are some of the boundaries, is that, as we said, one, that God is real, and that is objective. It's not a subjective thing. Okay, God is real, and He's creator. He's the one that created. okay, and the author of creation. Number 2 is that the human person is dignified by the creation of God and made in the image and likeness of God. Number 3 is that the human person is not just physical, but his body and soul. So the human is made of body and soul. Number 4, the foundational unit, that the way that God has created man is through the family. So humanity is meant to be living within the family unit, meant to be. And also that God is the final judge. That it's not up to us to judge one another. It's up to God to judge. And all those things you'll see relevance as we go through specific things that we have issues with in science or biology or bioethics. Any questions about that? Yeah.
You said before that the church should decide what to interpret from the Bible as what's right and wrong. But then you also said that when it's a person deciding that I'm just putting my own reason on what's right and wrong, that isn't the church essentially just made up of people and they'll be applying their reason to what's right and wrong.
So what will happen, and this is a kind of a practical question, because what will happen in general is that the church, as I said, will go principles, and then as the church deals with these questions, they will tell the congregation. But by the way, when the church tells the congregation that one way is right or wrong, especially when it comes to some of these topics, all of these decisions are ratified by the church, which is the people of God. So the people of God, the synod, a group of people who then, and even when the synod makes a decision, it's kind of accepted by the masses. If the masses don't accept it, it's kind of not a final decision. And then it goes back and they discuss it and they think about it, because we do believe that God works through the whole of the church, corporately, right? When it comes to individual decisions, there's certain individual decisions that you must face. Most of them, you can go to the church and ask, and the church will guide you, most of them. Sometimes you're in a tight spot and very quick decision, and then you have to work within your own principles. But the church has taught you that is based on God. Once you think outside of that, then you're losing something, if that makes sense. And then in that case, then you still have one other thing to hang on to, which is prayer. Because as we said, that the relationship to God is through worship. So in a moment of decision, for example, and you're struggling to make a decision, and you don't have time to go and ask Abuna or open the Bible, and you send up your heart to God in a relationship of worship. You say, God, guide this decision. I don't know what to do, but I'm going to do what I think is right. And that puts you in connection with God. It will help you make that decision in that moment. It's not always the way to make decisions, because sometimes then you have to use your reason based on the Bible, based on general principles about moving away from God, loving others, etc. If that makes sense. But in extreme circumstances, but thank God none of us are living within extreme circumstances, so we don't generally have to deal with that. Most of the time we have luxury of guidance, fathers, church, general principles to work through, to help us with our decisions. Does that help answer your question? Not really? Different tack?
I think what you're saying is the collective group of holy people guided by the Holy Spirit is enough to not let human reason.
Cloud. Yeah. So human reason is always, it's a part of the work of God. God is part of His creation. Okay? So human reason is part of the decision-making process. Okay? And God will never shut that down. Okay? And He works within human reason, but He doesn't work within one person's reason. So He works, especially in Orthodox Church, we believe in this collective consciousness, collective. So it might be led by one person. So one person's kind of leading it, he has an idea and he's pushing his idea, and then everyone comes around and then the church will accept it. But it's not based on one person's ideas. And that's why we don't glorify any one father, any of their writings, any of their teachings, and no one father we take as all right, never. We just take them as generally they're respected, so we might accept it. But if the church doesn't accept their teaching, we're happy to reject a teaching of a very venerated father. No, that teaching is wrong. We don't accept that teaching. Does that make sense?
Yeah. There's one person who's actually right, and the whole group is going against it. Would that one person be the better sort of side meeting halfway?
So there's one really good example from history where that happened. Does anyone know who that example is? Yeah, yeah. What's the there's a phrase? Yeah. So everyone's against you, Athanasius. The whole world is against you, and he said, "I am against the world." And he fought and fought and fought for what he thought was right, based on the Bible and what the church has taught before that, and he won the church around. In the end, the church made the decision, not Athanasius. The synods and the church and the bishops all came together. They decided all together, Athanasius is right, Arius is wrong. If the church decided the other way around, we would be following what they. But the church is obviously guided by the Holy Spirit. So there's a lot of other things here as well. That's not the purpose of the talk to go into history, but that's kind of. Abuna, do you have anything else to add to that?
The relativity of moralism. There was a very nice Christian family, very wealthy, and they had a slave boy, like a servant in the house, and the servant loved the only girl, the daughter of the parents, like of the family that he's serving, and he was desperate to marry her. So he went to a sorcerer, black magic, and he wrote with his own blood a contract between him and Satan. So actually, he makes the heart of this girl loves him. And given the parents did not want to, defame their daughters or whatever, they allowed him to marry her. And later on, they kept praying for their daughter and this small family that has been formed. And they noticed that this guy is not Christian altogether. He doesn't go to church, he doesn't pray, he doesn't do the sign of the cross. And they said, what's wrong? And he said, I had to do this and that. It's graphic. He had to go to the non-believer's cemetery in the middle of the night and write with his own blood that I will sell my soul to Satan, that I will be with him, and I give all and I will deny Christ, I will not follow the Christian, so forth. That was at the time of Saint Basil, who wrote that's actually the Synecdoche of today. So Saint Basil took him, they presented the problem to the bishop of the town, and Saint Basil prayed with him and made him fast for 3 days, and he fasted with him, and he said every night the evil spirit comes and beats him physically. And he said, okay, we're going to fast another 40 days, but, with food and, like just vegetarian fasting. And he made the whole congregation, that's about the unity of the church, to make the decision. And when at the end, after 40 days, the whole congregation gathered in the church and they kept praying, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. And the contract dropped in the church, in the middle of the church. And then later on, he was freed from that. So that shows, again, the relativity of moralism that we live in our day and age.
Yeah, so this concept it's through the history of the church. You find it in every part of the church saying the same thing, that we base it on the reality of God and nothing else. You don't have relationships with people outside of that. It has to be based on the reality of God. Okay? All right. So any other questions before we move on? All right, so there's a few things that, based on these kind of guidelines, the church, or in general terms, we think about, or what is right and wrong as Christians. Okay, so when we think about human life, we think about human life that life is a gift from God, and society is given that life in trust, and that society doesn't get to decide when humans lose life. Okay, they don't have the absolute right over life. Only God has the absolute right over life. Okay, so society has a responsibility to protect, transmit, and enhance life wherever it can. It should make life better. As Christians, wherever we can, we should be protecting life, transmitting life, enhancing life. It shouldn't, and because life is always a prerequisite of any other good. You can't have any other good here on earth without life. So we should always be enhancing life. So preservation of life is important, very important for ethics. So now we're going to go into some of the different things that we think about, and I'll give some kind of difficult circumstances where it kind of becomes hard. So the first is healthcare. Are we allowed to use healthcare? Or should we just trust in God? Should we use healthcare? the answer is, of course, yes. As far as possible, God has given us reasoning minds that have developed science. And as far as we can, we should always offer healthcare and accept healthcare. Okay? Because caring for your body and others people's health is a moral responsibility. Okay? And so I have on the screen there, and I've talked a bit to you guys about this before. So what I've got the examples of there that would be right or wrong based on that principle. Based on that principle, would shayishing be right or wrong? Would smoking be right or wrong? Would drugs be right or wrong? Would drunkenness be right or wrong? I didn't say God loves unity in this talk. I've talked about that in the past. I said group consciousness, yeah. Yeah, unhealthy eating would be part of that, for sure. For sure. It would be, especially as we understand more and more about the impacts on our health of some things. And there's more responsibility from society's side as well. When certain things are proven to cause harm, there is a moral responsibility there. So it is important that we look after our health. And a lot of those things come under that banner, okay? When you look after yourself, you should. If anyone has any questions or has any thoughts about any of these things, let us know. That when it comes to when it comes to healthcare, biology, anything really, you can't take away the rights of people. They can't take away their autonomy or dignity. You have to give them their autonomy and dignity as a moral responsibility. Why? Because we're made in the image and likeness of God. So what do you do then? Yeah, go. Yeah, good. So euthanasia we're going to get to in a minute. Yeah, okay. It's a reasonable example. Euthanasia we'll talk about, but there's other better examples of where autonomy is a bit of a problem. Yes, so they're not able to answer. So say they're in a vegetative state. Or if they're mentally disordered. So what about if someone has a mental health illness and they want to cut off their own leg? Do we stop them or do we let them cut off their own leg? You know, because there are mental health disorders that do that. And what medicine does is that it allows you, at least in Australia, it allows you to do it against their will, to give them treatment against their will. If someone's got dementia, for example, you're allowed to treat them against their will, based on the will of the doctor or their family or whatever, because they're mentally disordered. So you're taking away their autonomy, but for their sake, to do what's best for them and what they would want to do if they were mentally ordered, mentally. I guess there's another example I'll give where, and this is by no means to pass judgment, but this kind of happened, and I've told you guys this before, I think, but there was a guy once who had a very early type of cancer who didn't want treatment, refused treatment, very easily treatable, many options for treatment, and has very good chance of good quality of life. And he said, no, I don't want treatment. I'm kind of lonely, not interested in living longer. No. The specialist, no, what are you doing? There's a million different options for you. And they're not that invasive, and just, let's do them. The man refused. Disappeared for a while, comes back a year or two later, riddled with cancer. And of course, it's too late to do anything. Is it reasonable to exercise that type of autonomy? To say that I refuse to have treatment? Is there a moral grey, black area there? I don't know any of the Ask for Cancer. Do you know any of the Ask for Cancer one? Huh? Who? I don't know if he asked for cancer or not. I don't think he did. Yeah, I think, look, every now and then you might read a story in the Synaxarium or from a Life of a Saint that kind of gives you kind of like for example, John Chrysostom, the Starlights, you know, the ones who lived on it, and they're so extreme in their asceticism that even now your confession father say, don't do that. You're not allowed to do that because you're going to harm yourself. So these are exceptions. They're not the rule. What I'm thinking about is what's the way of thinking? What's the way of thinking? Is it okay to kind of refuse treatment in that kind of setting? Yeah, so I would agree with that. That the idea is that if you have the best chance and you have good outcomes, you know, you have good quality of life afterwards and things like that, it's not very reasonable to refuse treatment, you know, to say, no, I'm going to just pray to, you know, there's a case in the news at the moment. Again, this is not to judge anyone, but there's a case in the news at the moment of a family where the daughter was very sick. They got the church group to come and pray on the girl and she died instead of getting healthcare. Of course, they're getting attacked, and that is not to judge them because they're doing it based on what they're thinking. But as a church, we would say, no, go get treatment. You can pray on the way, but you get treatment because you have the capacity to get treatment. And so it wouldn't be a reasonable decision, morally acceptable decision, to refuse treatment when it's available to you like that. There is circumstances where it's okay. For example, when you've gone through all the treatments, if I do treatment, the chances are very low. The side effects are so high, I'm coming back to a very poor quality of life, then it would be okay to say, no, I don't want treatment anymore, because already the natural course of this illness is going to take my life in a short period of time anyway, or the quality of life to come back from it is so poor that I wouldn't go ahead. There is no specific line. It's based on you, your family, the church, and your individual circumstance. Yeah, there is no specific. But what I'm saying is there is circumstances where it's okay to say no more treatment, but there is other circumstances where it's just wrong to say, oh, I think morally the church would say that it's not okay to just not get treatment. You know, spiritualize it away or whatever. Yeah, it is, yeah.
Different outcomes. So isn't it very subjective at the end of the day? And if a practitioner is, you know, religious versus a practitioner is not religious, doesn't it then become very subjective again?
Not really in the example I gave, no, because the data is there to say that no, you have very good outcomes here. Okay, we have a lot of evidence to say that there's good outcomes here. In case by cases, there's a little bit of subjectivity, but only a little bit. It's to do with are the outcomes so poor that it's not worth anymore, that you have the right to say no more, or the outcomes are so good. And in general terms, the church would be pretty consistent in that application, I think. But every now and then, there's a little bit of subjectivity in there because of the specific circumstance. What about human experimentation? Is human experimentation okay? In general terms, it's wrong, but actually, all evidence-based medicine now is all based on studies in humans, and that's human experimentation. So we do allow some human experimentation, but it's got to be within clear moral boundaries. I've given you this example before. I can't remember the name of the guy, but there was he's a gynecologist who refused to treat cervical cancer, and he just kept data on all these women that came in at different levels of cervical cancer. And of course, many women died under his hand because he just didn't treat it. He just was observing the data. Since then, medicine has benefited greatly from his data, right? Is what he did okay? No.
They did a lot of medical experiments on humans that advanced medicine, but at the cost of heaps of human life. So obviously not okay, because those people are still humans and they don't deserve to be treated like that.
What do you think of Buna? Yeah.
medium or the pathway has to be pure.
Has to be pure as well, yeah. I would agree with that 100%. You could argue, according to the greater good, that gynecologist has saved many more lives than he killed, right? Over generations, probably saved heaps more lives than he killed, but still, it's not justifiable because humans have a dignity. Each individual human has a dignity, yeah.
In the Bible, where I'm not sure which verse, but it used to say, like, you know, like Adam or the characters early on, that they lived on larger years than we could ever be able to live in. Wouldn't you say that it's actually our fault for all the diseases that have been brought in, and any, I guess, morally good or immorally good action that we do is just purely because we just can't catch up to our mistakes that we have come up throughout time? For example, you know, bringing cancer to the world, or AIDS, or any of these diseases that weren't even, you know, around biblically, and now that they are, and everyone that is getting it, it's purely a humankind error, and now we just can't catch up with the cures that are around. So we're like, we'll always suffer in the body that is here. And I guess the good outcome is that we have God with us to make it less sufferable.
I think, yeah, I mean, I guess the point you're touching on is why does God allow disease and things like that? And part of that is, the Orthodox understanding would be that with the fall of humanity, the fall of nature fell with it, and then disease entered in. Some diseases come from our behaviors, other diseases, they're just there in nature. And so, but yeah, some of them are in, why we live long then and not now is anyone's guess, you know. But that the biblical interpretation is that God decided that no longer will humans live that long. There's too much room for error, basically, in human life. But yeah, so it's disease enters into humanity. The Orthodox understanding is that it was by the fall of nature, by fall of humanity, and same with sin. The way that sin entered, disease entered. All right. Do you guys have more energy for more of this, or Andy, we call it? It's 9:30. I think you promised everyone that we'll finish at 9:30. Huh? Do you guys want to keep going? Some people yes, some people no. Okay, we'll do a couple more. Okay, so the topics that I was going to talk about is abortion, organ transplantation, death and dying. So that's around death penalty, euthanasia, and then assisted fertilization, human sexuality, fertility control, genetic manipulation. There's some of the topics there. So it's going to go for a while if we talk about all of them. So are there any particular ones you guys want to talk about that are a bit confusing for you more than others? Okay, so first we'll talk about death penalty. Okay, so now we'll get to that. Okay, so death and dying. So we'll quickly talk about that to answer Danny's question about death penalty. So God is the giver of life. God is the taker of life. It's not up to humans to decide when life goes. And so we believe in something called the good death. Euthanasia, I think, means good death, right? That's what it means. So people are asking to die in a way that they want to die. They don't want to suffer indignity. So if anyone's ever cared for someone late in life when they have bad illnesses, it can be undignifying. You know, when you lose your mind, you lose your physical capacity to do things and things like that. So they say, I don't want to go live in pain, and they don't want to live through that. They want to die. But as trustees of life, it's not up to us to decide when someone dies or when someone doesn't die. Okay? And so we would say that actively causing death, in general terms, is not okay. Medicine doesn't have the right to do that. Medicine has the right to stop treating, but doesn't have the right, and to let nature take its course, but doesn't have the right to you actively take away life. And so you run across some conundrums in that setting where I've got the example there of life support machines. When is it okay to turn them off? Okay. But the other conundrum is the death penalty. So what then, based on that, what we just talked about, do we do about the death penalty? What's the church's general perspective on the death penalty? Yeah. So we did this talk before, yeah. Yeah? Anyone else have anything else to say about that? So it's actually a complex question. If the church was running the state, the church would be against it. But that's why the church doesn't run the state, and it shouldn't run the state. It's not a political party, you know. So that when the church becomes tied in with the state, it becomes a very complex question. But when the church is actually just the moral conscience of the state, we generally, in general terms, we don't believe in taking life, but it allows the government to do what it needs to do to run its country. So it allows governments to go to war, and allows them to have laws, and if the law has death penalty, the church abides by that, right? It encourages people not to, whatever. It might appeal for people's lives and get them off the death penalty, but it doesn't actually actively go and lobby and stop the death penalty and things like that, because it allows the government to decide what is good for its people particularly in that topic. It actually does just allow it. Is that right, Abuna?
The church is still abiding by the Old Testament, because the Old Testament, there is a clear verse that the man who kills another human by a hand of another human, he should be killed. And I was listening to the book of Exodus when, you remember when Moses came down from the mountain and he saw the people worshipping idols, and he said, stop, everyone, come to the Lord, and he broke the 10 commandments, and he was very angry and upset, and he said, everyone to his tent, whoever will be found worshipping idols or outside his tent or naked or doing the sin of, sexual sins will be killed. So they killed, the Levites, they killed thousands of the Israelites to actually calm God's anger against the people who worshipped idol. So I think from the Old Testament, the only, you find it in countries like America when they have the death penalty, it's the strongest ever cause for a person not to commit crimes, because he knows what's the end. But here in Australia, if he knows he can kill whoever he wants, and at the end of the day, he will just spend a few years and come back. So I think, in a sense, I will understand it, because being born in Egypt and raised up in Egypt, this killing can actually put an end, a misery for the detrimental outcome, because the person who takes a life of another person, he himself will be suffering all his life. So first of all, you're passing God's judgment on him. Secondly, he knows the end of his life, so he has to repent and come back to God and actually, shape up at the few hours or few days that's left in his life. So it's controversial, as Otsak said, but we abide by the state's rules.
So the church generally just allow the state to make that rule. As I said, the church generally is not the state. If the church was the state, then it would have to answer the question, does it accept death penalty or not? It's not the state. I don't think the church ever should be the state. So, but if it was, I think as a group, the church would probably not apply the death penalty. And that's just in a personal opinion. I don't know what the church would do in that setting, but the church doesn't run the state, and so it goes against. What the church understands is that the government has a responsibility to protect its people, okay? To supply justice, to supply mercy, to supply deterrence to crime. And the government has that responsibility. Now, if a given government decides that if someone commits that level of crime, the only fair way of dealing with it is to have them killed, the church just accepts that. Just says, you know what? Fair enough. The person did rape and murder, or this many rapes and murders, or was that cruel to someone else. And yes, they're forgiven in front of God, but here on earth, they have to be incarcerated forever, or they have to be killed. And that's the government's decision. The church just kind of accepts that. in general terms, in general, the church will generally support the state. So the state, they consider the state as something that has authority from God, in general terms. Okay, so St. Paul is clear on that principle, that render unto Jesus himself, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's. St. Paul says you follow and the only people who are scared of the state or the laws or the police or whatever are people who break the laws. People who follow the laws are not afraid of authority. Okay, so generally they will accept. Every now and then, if the state goes completely against the will of God, then the church they don't go to civil war or anything, generally speaking. They don't take up arms, but they might do a bit of peaceful resistance. Say, no, we don't accept, and we lobby, and we won't behave in that way. Does that make sense? In general. In the specific case of death penalty, over centuries, the church has just always accepted that particular thing. That's just that's one of those things, as you said before, the human reason, that the church as a general consciousness has accepted that the church doesn't fight against that particular rule. Although it does fight against the rule about abortion, it does fight against rules about, it doesn't fight so much, but it kind of doesn't accept, and doesn't allow its people to be involved in that. Do you know what I mean? But it does accept that the government does what they do. They have the rights to run their people. Yeah, maybe in front of God there is. I don't know what that is. I personally don't know. That's personal. And I think the church has accepted that the government has the right to do that. In the same way that it's accepted that war is bad, but the church does not tell the soldier not to kill. The church accepts the soldier to kill in the context of war. Why? Because the government has the responsibility of protecting its nation, protecting its people from raping and pillaging and disease, and so it has to have certain people do certain things that are not nice, but to protect its people. For the sake of many reasons, that to fulfill their responsibility in front of God, that they have to. And so the government is fulfilling its responsibility by incarcerating someone all their life. We don't believe in taking away someone's freedom. So the church, again, wouldn't believe in prison if you hold that thinking. We forgive them, they said sorry, no need to punish them. To another cheek. No, they have to be incarcerated forever, because what if they harm another? What if deterring other people, etc., etc. Yeah.
Look after them. So actually, because you're going to punish them if they're alive, your choice is to kill them through abortion.
So we'll get to the abortion question after we answer the transgender question. So what's the question about transgender?
Like, what do we say people, now people are going more, even people maybe in the church, maybe in the church, would say things like, what's so bad about being gay or lesbian? Why don't we just accept everyone? It's alright. And then why not respect someone changing gender, blah, blah, blah. So what do we say in response to that?
You just have to, like Chris's point as well, like for example, knowingly some other churches, for example, I think some select dioceses of the Anglican Church accept gay marriage. Like they accept it, or they have transgender priests and stuff like that in the church.
Yeah, so
and
that's
other
true.
people look to that church and they'll be like, well, hang on, this church says no, but this church says yeah.
That's true, and we're going to face that reality more and more as time goes by. So that kind of boils down to our understanding of human sexuality, right? So I don't know if I've... Okay, so I didn't actually address that there, but we understand the human person made in the image and likeness of God, made as man and woman. Okay, we believe in that fundamental reality, that man is made as man and woman, distinct, but both human, but distinct. Okay, and each one has a role, has a function, and that human sexuality is designed to be in the context of one man and one woman. Okay, so that's the fundamental truth that leads to all the other thinking about human sexuality. Okay, so what do we say about transgender or homosexual relationships? Well, that is outside the boundaries of what we would say is the purpose of God. One man, one woman in a sexual relationship. In the few circumstances where there's a health issue causing someone to be unsure of their gender, either hormonally or mentally or whatever, then we would say that the church would say that, all right, that's fine, they're still a human, they're still to be looked after in every way, but there's something wrong in the way that they're, in the same way that someone who's angry all the time was something wrong. God didn't make us designed to be angry all the time, okay? So there's something wrong there that needs to be adjusted, corrected, dealt with, okay? And that's the Orthodox understanding, okay? And that, but the sexual relationship is to be in the context of man and woman, in monogamy. The only way to guarantee monogamy is what? Marriage. It's the only way to guarantee monogamy, so therefore there's no sexual relationship outside of marriage.
Would you say this to someone to their face who is bisexual? Or
It depends. If they're genuinely asking what's the church's perspective, I'd explain the church's perspective from ABC. That this is what the church has always taught. This is our understanding. It's not, at the end of the day, we said from the beginning that God is the final judge. It's not up to me to judge anyone. But if you want to know the church's perspective, the Orthodox understanding, well, that's the Orthodox understanding. It's always been the Orthodox understanding. So we now have to face all these different, the science around it, and still we have to face it, yes. But at the same time, we have not changed our general understanding that humans are made male and female, and distinctly male, and that's core to who you are is your maleness and your femaleness. It's who you are, and that's not something that is fluid, changing, adjustable. And so it is part of who you are, and the relationship that you have with someone has to be within that context, okay? And that is, we would believe genuinely that that's the way you would be the most joyful, the most fulfilled in life is to be male or female.
so what about, like, for example, if there is a person in the church that is gay or bisexual or a part of this whole community, right? Then what are we to do? Like, for example, now, many governments around the world, including Australia, New Zealand, all of those other countries are introducing like legislation against conversion therapy and stuff like that. So how would the church go about that?
So it's a challenge that the church has to face. In general terms, again, we'll follow the rules, but I mean, conversion therapy is a very broad term, and it's a term that's not well understood inside the church nor outside the church. But the church will treat everyone the same, no matter what they're dealing with, no matter what mental health issues they have, physical issues they have, sins they have, personalities they have. The church is the same for everyone. It's a place for healing. It's a place to come and connect with God. And it's a place that if you want to be a part of the community of believers, then you have to ascribe to the rules of the community of believers, which is dictated to by God and the church. So no one is different. No one. Everyone has to follow that scheme, right? Us. And so any of us who want to commit any mistake and insist that my mistake is okay, no, the church won't accept that. So, and anyone who is trying to connect to God and willing to follow the rules of the church will be accepted by the church. That is the same across the board. The problem with the whole question about transgender and homosexuality and all that, it's become its own unique question. But actually, it's the same. It's the same. That the church has a set of rules and boundaries and way of thinking. Conform with that, and you're here to connect to God. You're not here to put your ideology on the church, or it's always to be. There's only one way of thinking the church has, which is that all people are there to connect to God in the church, which is connected to the what? The linchpin of reality. Wouldn't you have anything to add to that? Harder. Yeah. It's only going to get harder. So the specific. So if someone comes to a priest and says, "Look, I'm struggling with this. I don't want to have anything to do with it. What do I do?" The priest will always counsel that person, help that person to connect to God. The priest will never ever say no. If part of the process of connecting to God is helping them overcome certain emotions and feelings that they don't want, the priest will do that. The priest will never say no to that. Why? Because part of connecting to God, it's not about conversion. What's happened in society is they've put it as a question of a medical conversion theory. You have this specific technique to harm someone mentally. It's absolutely not what's happening. What's happening is there's people who want to connect to God and they want to deal with certain feelings and emotions, and a part of connecting to God is dealing with that, then the church will help them deal with that. I think that's the bottom line.
Another big moral dilemma in Egypt, I know we're taking more time.
No, yeah.
A baby just like a few days old, was found in the toilet in one of the churches in Egypt. So the parish priest was informed, and he took this baby. That happened 5 years ago. He took this baby to a family that didn't have kids. So they raised him up until Shenouda was 5 years old. Now, the civil law in Egypt, that there is no adoption in the Islamic Sharia law. There is no adoption. So what happened that because of that couple, that childless couple, when they die, the one who will inherit them are the family. So the family knew that secret, so they reported him to the authority. So overnight, this Shenouda became Ali in an orphanage in Egypt. What's the stand of the church? They are putting tremendous pressure. The Christians saying he's been baptized, he's been from a Christian family, he's been living with a Christian family. But at the end of the day, we still respect the law of the land. Although it is very obvious that the law of the land is biased. You can't change Shenouda to Ali. So this is a very moral question, and rights and like, you know, things that happen in Iran for the hijab or whatever, that's actually like, you know, society can still pressure against Moses. When he went up the mountain, they pressured Aaron, which is a priest that has seen miracles. The 10 plagues had split the Red Sea, and they forced Aaron to make an ox, a golden ox, and they worshipped it. Okay? So there is always going to be a pressure from the environment against the church, but the church has to abide by the truth. And if the church, like, you know, takes side tracks and steer away from the reality and the truth of the Bible, the church will not have conviction on the world. Once Pope Shenouda was coming to Australia on his way, he went to Honolulu. And the same week that Sayyidina Pope Shenouda III, his of يعني طيب الذكر, he was in the, one of the reporters asked him what's the church's stand about homosexuality, and he started to mention in details all the incidents in the Bible that it was not accepted by God. Now a governor next to him that was Christian, he said no one in the whole country, in the whole Honolulu, was able to say what you said. So still there's going to be a clashes or on collisions about this morality every now and then, and you know, that's why our forefathers got martyred for the true faith, for the, as Abuna said, Bob Asanasis contra mundum.
They're going to get more and more difficult, and the church has to kind of deal with them, but the church will navigate it the best way it can. Any, do you want to answer the abortion question, or we're going to skip your question? Huh? Oh, good. Does anyone want to answer Mark's abortion question? Oh, that's it. We're too tired.
You can't know before a child is born what kind of life it's going to have.
What was the question? I didn't hear the question.
Saying, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you were saying, is it all right to have an abortion if you know the child is going to be born into a life of suffering, right? Is that what you were saying? Yeah.
I think in general terms, so in terms of, we believe that there's a human being from the second the sperm hits the egg. And so I think that kind of logic And that is the logic that a lot of people use, but it's the same as saying that, well, my wife died. My life's going to be miserable. Might as well just kill me. You know, and how do I know what's in store for me? How can we dictate the future? We don't have a vision of the future to know that this person's life will be miserable. And there's so many options outside of the care of the parents anyway, and so I don't think that would justify it, no. Yeah, of course, yeah. In that case, yes. We don't, and that's why the church is not the one giving the death penalty. It's letting the government do what it needs to do. That's all the church is doing. It's not sanctioning it, nor is it condemning it. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't do either. It just kind of lets the government decide. In this case, yeah, the person might have a hard life, but we don't know if that's not going to lead to salvation. Either way, we have to, and might try and help them get into a better life, you know. There are much more difficult abortion questions, like when the life of the mother is at stake and things like that. Or a product of rape. It's a very hard one. The trauma that's associated with that, yeah. So there is some hard questions when it comes to abortion.
But how come the church is very firm on certain things like abortion, like, you know, death penalty, or that, whatever else, and then things like, for example, remarrying or like divorce in the Bible, where it's clear cut no, the church is like more and more accepting of allowing people to remarry, allowing this like a divorce in certain situations. In the Bible, like it says it clearly, like no, like it's not allowed. Like you read it like at a wedding gospel. So how come the church allows some things and then some things it's very firm, but the message is still the same?
So Buna can answer that one a bit better than me, I think. So look, as I said, the church is a living organism that the Holy Spirit guides, and so it's never super rigid to the extent where it allows itself to kind of see the circumstance and the situation that humans are within, and kind of it's guided to navigate that situation. Okay. And that's why from the beginning, sometimes you might have a problem with one particular thing that the church has said, but the church over time has accepted that, and because there's sometimes no right answer. It's kind of the lesser of two wrongs. In the case of divorce specifically, the church is against it and generally tries to avoid it under almost all circumstances, and it's always been strict, but it's always allowed divorce in some circumstances, always. And the principle that it allows divorce under is that the marriage is no longer a marriage in the way that God has made it a marriage. Okay? So if it hasn't been consummated, it's and the way that the Catholic Church calls it, it's annulled. I think we use the same term. It's annulled, it's null and void. It's like a contract that was never signed properly. You know, it was in the terms of the agreement, not in terms of the agreement the way we think of contract, but it was not. So if there's an illness that the relationship was based on a lie, well, it's not a real relationship. If one party absolutely refuses to be with the other party, well, they're not party to that relationship. There is no marriage there, you know. So the church then has always had that in terms of sexual immorality, saying, well, that's voided the relationship, and therefore it allows divorce in that specific circumstance. All that's happened in, I think, a little bit of recent history, and I'm not across it, I'm not part of the clerical council and things like that, so I don't know the details, but it has just broadened the definition of what constitutes a void relationship. It's void. You can't have a relationship based on this kind of repeated abuse, for example, or something like that. You know, it's not, there's certain circumstances where the church will say, well, based on this setting, in this case, it's not a broad term, it's in this case, the relationship is void. There's something wrong here that the parties cannot continue in, and therefore there's an annulment. It's annulled, it's void relationship. Okay? Buna, do you have anything to add to that?
In any marital relationship, the church looks at the kids as well. No one wants kids to be raised without a loving and caring family. But having said that, always if some families have severe issues, the church as a mother try to find a solution for them. And part of the solution, maybe as Abuna said, maybe the going back and digging back how long was the engagement period for, what happened around the marriage time, if there is any issues that actually will make the church, like example, مثلا, a husband that had medical illness and he hid it from everyone and from the family, and actually it became worse after marriage because he was living on his own all the time and suddenly he lives with someone else. So whatever has been built, or someone had AIDS, or a lady that is not full lady that cannot have children. So all of these can be counted as reasons of annulment or dissolving the marriage that has not been fully completed from all facets. Still, according to our church and our Holy Synod, we are not easy about separation or divorce, because it's actually against the Bible. So the only 3 conditions for divorce are if one of the parties changes religion, or if there is a sin of adultery, adultery, so one of the parties have cheated on the other party, or as I said, the categories of annulment. So I was actually witnessed with my own eyes that the bishop has to go through. It's actually a group of 5 people that judge this. One of them is a lawyer, one of them is a doctor, and a clergy, 2 priests, and a bishop. So it's actually a special, it's like a court, and they take every case according to its merits, and they discuss it in depth and in details. And they don't give divorce. We give permission to remarry for the party that's actually is not in the wrong. Example, مثلا, a man that is seeing other women, and his wife is innocent, and he does have children, but his wife cannot put up with his behavior, and there is proof of that, then the church will give a permission to remarry for the person that's actually has been hard done with. But for the other party, the church will accept him in the church in a repentance form, but it will not entrust him with another marriage relationship, given that he failed in the previous one. So that's a tough one.
As a principle, the church, as Bruno was saying, that the church has to abide by the laws of Christ. The church also has to be a mother and care for the salvation of souls. And so they have sometimes very difficult questions to answer for the salvation of a particular individual or family, that from an external perspective may be looking like the church is breaking the laws of God, but actually the church is trying to navigate a very difficult situation, and so it's an unenviable task and a thankless task. So whoever has to do that job, we thank them very much for doing it, because no one ever wants to do that job, decide who can and who can't and all that kind of stuff. Very hard. Okay, glory be to God forever. Amen. Thanks for listening, guys. Very long night.